All right. So yesterday we worked out some application requirements in about an hour, made some GitHub issues. This is for a charity auction website that we're going to build for an organization that I'm part of. So let's now do our basic setup of the Rails app. And again, my whole point about recording all of this is just to show every single step, literally, that's taken to create an application, for just in case it helps someone that's newer to one part of this. Okay, so we're going to start with Rails new. So we don't even have the application built yet at all. Okay, so I've got a charity auction directory that I'm using for the different apps that we make here. So I'm going to just go with the basic Rails new charity auction-server. Now we'll have a web client later. That's why I'm sort of adding on the server in the back with the charity auction namespace. So in my Rails RC, I've got Postgres set as the database, and I've got it set to skip test unit because we'll be using RSpec, but we can just run it otherwise. Now, I know that in the newer Rails, and you can see up here what those configs were. So using -t -d Postgres. So that's from Rails RC that is skipping test unit in Postgres. Okay, so this just created the basic Rails setup, and I'm going to go into here, and then what we're going to do is kind of take that default, and I'm going to remove the things that are necessary. Now, I know that sometimes you'll see people use the Rails 5 -- API or whatever the syntax is. So I'm going to basically get the same thing done just by removing at least some of the core things that I don't need that Rails puts in. Then we'll add some gems that we need, get it set up for testing, get it set up for sort of the base setup that we need. Okay, so I'm going to open up Atom, which is the text editor that I use, and then I'll switch to that so we can take a look around. All right. All right, so we've got our text editor up now. So, I don't even have a script on this, so I'm just gonna, and I think that that's helpful because we'll sort of trip through this together. I'll just change all of the things that I initially changed when I type Rails new, kind of to get it into my default state. So one is just because I see this, change the README to Markdown. We won't type this out now, but I'll just change the heading and then get rid of the rest. All right, we'll take a look at the Gemfile and sort of read through here, and I'm going to take out the things that I don't need. Now, the design of the application is going to be API first, so we're going to build a JSON API compliant API. We're not going to render anything from the server, so we can take out a bunch of things that we don't need. We'll just walk through that and do this. So first, and this is a superstition that's really probably quite silly, but I use double quotes everywhere in my Ruby programming, or not everywhere, but just about everywhere. I just find it easier to look at when it's all consistent. So I'll change this file to that because otherwise it'll bug me. Okay, so let's go through these. So Rails 424, so that's what we'll stick with that. And I'm going to delete the comments here because I don't think that they're needed. Postgres we're going to use. I'm going to use Heroku to host this. That's fine. Now, Sass Rails I can get rid of because we are not going to be rendering anything on the server. So that's not needed. Same on Uglifier. We'll statically host the application, so we don't need that. CoffeeScript, same deal. Okay. jQuery Rails and Turbo links, I can get rid of those, same reason. JBuilder 2 and SDoc I'm going to get rid of because we're going to focus on the publicly accessible API documentation. And if I ever need any of these, I can come back and add them. That's fine. Now, I am going to use bcrypt later when we have our when we deal with authentication. So I'm going to add this back in because we're going to use hash secure password. So that's fine. On the app server, I'm going to use Puma because I like to use that on Heroku. So I'll switch to that. Capistrano Rails, we're not going to use. Bybug, we're going to keep. So I'm going to stick with that. Web console, again, we're not rendering anything, so I don't need that. Spring, I will keep. So that's our new Gemfile. And this is what we're going to start with. And now I'm going to add things on from here. So I'm going to run bundle install. Now, it's a little bit inconvenient for me to switch back and forth to my terminal, but I'm just typing in bundle install here. And there we go. I've installed it, so that's good. So now let's talk about what else we need. Okay, so the things that we're going to add in next are kind of the basic stuff that I use to build an application like this. Now, I'm not going to worry about adding every gem in that we're going to use, but I'm going to add in the basic ones that we need to work on the issues that we created last time, which were the creation of the various models that we need for our domain. So I'm just going to make a note for myself here on the side. So those are, I want RSpec Rails in. So that's one. I want Factory Girl because I use Factory Girl instead of fixtures. So I'm going to have that. I want Spring RSpec, that integration. I think to make the typing a little bit easier for this, for everyone, I'm going to use Shoulda matchers. We'll get into what that is. Sometimes I don't use that. It kind of depends on my mood, but I'm going to go with Shoulda matchers for now, just because it'll make the TDD process a little bit faster, which is helpful since I'm typing and talking at the same time. And you know, maybe I'll show how I do some things if I don't use Shoulda matchers. Okay, so I've got RSpec, Factory Girl, Spring RSpec, Shoulda matchers, and then, you know, we'll take it from there. Okay, so step one, let's do RSpec Rails. So I'm going to go to the various websites that I would go to take a look at kind of the, if I didn't know what to do, where I would go, just because I think that that could be useful to you to see sort of just that it's no big deal to look at the documentation and figure it out. Okay, so RSpec Rails, I'm just going to go to their GitHub page. And here we go. So we're just going to follow the instructions. So number one is we're going to add it to both development and test groups in our Gemfile. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll switch back over and we'll take a look when I'm done looking at this documentation. Now, if you're wondering about why RSpec instead of test unit, I think it's 50% that it's my preference. It's what I've used for longer. But I think the other part is that I really like some of the tooling that we're going to use around documentation using RSpec tests. And while I don't mind using test unit if I have to on a project, I really prefer the workflow, and I think I get a lot more out of RSpec, so that's what I'm going to stick to. Okay, so we've got we're going to go RSpec 3.0. I'm going to look down, and then we're going to bundle install that and run this generator. So I'll do that now. And then, okay. So bundle exec generate RSpec install. And that'll get the basic files that we need, and I'll switch over to that and we can take a look. All right, and there we go. That's all we're going to need to do. So I'm going to switch over to our app, and we'll take a look at how that's working. All right, so let's go to Atom. And I use Atom as my text editor. Again, there's no serious magic in this, of course, but you could use whatever you like. I like that it's open source. I like that it's a GUI, and I like the packages now that it has. It's not the fastest thing in the world. I think that's the negative, but the rest of it seems worth it. Okay, so you see I've added RSpec Rails to my Gemfile in the group for development and test. Now I will take a look at what it's added. All right, so it added .RSpec, spec helper, and Rails helper. So let's take a look at those. Okay, so Rails helper. So you can read through the comments, and I think that they're pretty straightforward. I'll just add a couple of the things that I know I'm going to want. So I do like to require everything in spec support. For convenience, it says it can increase boot time. Yeah, that's true, but I'm going to actually run Rails helper instead of spec helper by default. So that's going to add some time anyways, but be a bit more convenient. So I'm going to do that. We're not going to use active record or fixtures, so I'm going to take out that. Transactional fixtures I will do. The rest is fine here to keep, so that's good. I'm going to take a look at my is it .rails? .RSpec, all right. Okay, so in .RSpec, this is sort of like .rails RC, so I'm going to just put some defaults in here for what I want it to run with. So dash color I want, and then instead of require spec helper, I'm going to have it require Rails helper. Again, that adds a little bit to the boot time, but then that avoids me having to require Rails helper in 100% or nearly 100% of my specs. So I'm going to change that. And now let's take a look at spec helper. So same deal. It's got tons of documentation about what we can configure. Let's take a look through. All right. So I do want to include the chain clauses and custom attribute descriptions, so I'm going to keep that for now, at least. Verify partial doubles. We are going to keep that. Prevents us from mocking or stubbing a method that doesn't exist. I like that as a feature. And then here are the suggested kind of base configs. So I'm just going to comment this out, and then we'll take a look through and see if we want to keep them all. Filter on focus, we will do that. You know, this has to do with the way that you can pick and choose individual groups or tests to run with. So run all when everything is filtered true. So this is sort of why it'll run everything by default, but we can filter down if we add some metadata. So it's fine. A great feature of RSpec now is this example status persistence. So when it runs, it records what failed and then allows us to use this config flag only failures to run just the specs that failed the last time, not all the specs. That can be super helpful in a big code base and won't matter a lot in this one, but I definitely like that feature. I use it all the time, so I'm going to keep that. Disable monkey patching has been a thing now in RSpec 3 that I'm going to stick with. Default formatter doc, that's fine. Profile examples, I'm going to go with false because I don't think that speed is an issue. This won't be an issue with this application, so we don't need to do that. Random config order, okay, that's fine. So now I've got my spec helper, and I should be able to run the tests now. So in RSpec, no such file or directory. Okay, so we need to create the bin stub for RSpec. That's why we saw that error. And what I did there is I ran Control-Command-T in Atom after installing this package, which is called Ruby test. So I'm just going to show you that. So here's Ruby test, and you can see that it has a default run all specs as bin/RSpec. You know, this command, and that is bound to Control-Command-T in what I'm doing. So that's how I ran those tests. I run most of my tests in Atom as I run. I don't use guard, and I tend not to use the terminal to run the tests, although sometimes. So I said we wanted to add Spring RSpec combination. So let's take a look at that. So Spring sometimes gets a bad rap, and I think application like sort of preloaders, they've had a tough problem to solve in general, and I think that there's always going to be some problems now and then where the application's not reloaded and are in a state you didn't expect, and you're going to have to figure that out the hard way. But I think that the net benefit of it booting up quicker is worth it. So I like Spring, and I use it. So I'm going to take, we want Spring and RSpec to play nicely. So I'm going to show you we're going to take a look at the gem that we'll use to do that. Okay, so I'm just going to search for Spring RSpec in Google, and I'll share that. Okay. So here we go. John Layton is the guy that wrote Spring originally, I'm pretty sure. So let's take a look at what this is. So again, it implements our RSpec command for Spring. Fine. We just add this to our development group. So I'm going to do that. Okay. And then I need to run this command in order to generate bin RSpec, and then stop and restart in order to get it going. Now I don't need to do that because I actually haven't started the app with Spring yet, but if you had, you'd need to run that. All right. Now I'm just going to switch over to my terminal so you can see this. Not that there's a lot to it, but okay. So I'm just going to run that command again, bundle exec spring bin stub RSpec, and you can see it created this file, so bin/RSpec. Now it said run Spring stop. Oops, stop. Now Spring's not running, but in case it was. And now when I run bin RSpec, it should, well, I thought it would work fine. Let's see why it didn't. Oh, right. Okay. So and I'm happy that sort of these problems will happen, because that'll just get you comfortable with what to do when you see something that you didn't expect. So the reason that we're seeing this is because I'm running Rails helper instead of spec helper. So in fact, if I go and change, and I'm going to just to make this point, if I go and change my .RSpec file, we'll see how that behaves differently. So RSpec. Okay, so I'll change this to spec helper just to make the point. And then when I run bin RSpec, what does it say here? To syntax error. I do not know why that error is happening. Let me figure this out. So let me switch over to my terminal. All right, so now if I run bundle exec RSpec, it should work fine because I've switched to spec helper. If I run bin RSpec, it should also work fine. You can see how fast it is because it's preloaded. All right, I'll Spring stop it and run that again. That'll take a little bit longer because it's booting. Now we're fine. Okay, so I'm not sure why the test runner is having trouble in Atom, but we will figure that out. Oh, I know why. Because I was running the test from that file. Jeez, instead of all the tests. Okay, I just was using the wrong command. All right, so now that's working fine. And again, we'll go back and change to Rails helper in the .RSpec file a little bit later. So that's good. Now we've added RSpec Rails. We've configured it a little bit, but basically kept the default config that's recommended. And we'll add some of the things as we go. Now I had two more things on my list. So switch my camera here. So I had two more things on my list. They were Factory Girl and Shoulda matchers that are sort of like my basic RSpec testing setup. So let's start with Factory Girl next. Okay, so let's go back to Google and we'll just take a look at Factory Girl. All right. So if you haven't used Factory Girl, it's a fixture replacement. I think some people don't like it as much as I do, but I find it great. I think it's a very helpful sort of piece of your infrastructure to sort of be able to compose together states that you want to test. And I think it's quite good and pretty straightforward to use. All right, so we are going to, I think we actually want to use Factory Girl Rails. So there we go. Let's go over it. So Factory Girl Rails, and we'll just look at the instructions and then use that. So we're going to add it to our Gemfile. We are going to use it as our fixture replacement, so we don't have to change this. It's going to use test factories, or spec factories rather, which is fine. Okay, so all I have to do then is use gem factory girls, or add that to my gem file, and there's really nothing else to do besides that. So now I tend to, even when I've done something a million times, like I've added Factory Girl Rails to an application a million times, I tend to go back and check the gem, or check the GitHub project every time, just because, you know, new versions come out, they may change the README, there may be configurations that I wasn't familiar with, and you know, that's a way to keep up with it. Okay, so we're going to add that to our development and test environment. Okay, now we'll bundle install, get that, and then that's that. Now, the last thing we're going to do is add Shoulda matchers. Now, again, I didn't think that this was sort of required exactly, and I don't always do it, but I think it's a pretty helpful. I think it's a pretty helpful gem. Another one from ThoughtBot too, just like Factory Girl was. So let's take a look at that next. Okay. Shoulda matchers. All right. So it's a collection of sort of testing matchers, right? That make writing the specs a little bit nicer, and you can see sort of an idea of what they'll be like, you know, nice simple validation matchers, a bunch of basic sort of attribute and relationship matchers. You know, I tend to use the active model and active record ones a decent amount, and then I'll forget the rest, because I'm not using action controller really in a way that's similar to what they were imagining here. So I don't often use these matchers anymore. I used to, but let's take a look at how to do it. So we're going to add this to our test because it's just helping with our specs. And 3.0 came out earlier this year, if I remember right. So we are going to do this first, and then it says configure the gem to integrate with RSpec. And yeah, so we're going to go back and take a look at that. This is a good example of new documentation. I don't believe that that documentation was what was there the last time I came to the Shoulda matchers website. And in fact, I think that 3.0 may not even been in the README that time. So that's good. I'm glad I came here. So let's add this first. And then we'll go and do the rest. So we're just going to have this in our test. We don't have that group yet. Now you can just sort of inline the group, but I tend not to because I'll usually have more than one gem in a given group, so I might as well just create it in the first place. All right, so get that. All right, so I've got 3.0 installed. Now let's go back and check out Let's go back and check out the documentation, sort of read through what they say in terms of configuration. All right. Oh, I shared the wrong screen. All right, so let's get back to where I was. All right, so here's how to configure with RSpec. Okay, so we're gonna add this to our spec helper file. I'm just gonna copy this over, and then I will change from there. All right, so go into spec helper, and then let's configure this. Okay, so we are going to use test framework RSpec. We're going to use active record, active model, and active controller. And I'm going to use all those with library Rails. Okay, so that should be what we need to do. If we see issues, we'll fix them later, but I'm pretty sure that that's right. And that syntax is different than what I recalled. So either I was using something different or something's changed. But okay, so I've got those now also. So I'm going to commit that now as sort of my, no, we're going to do a couple more things. So I'm also just going to, while I remember it, remove some of the application CSS and JS that I don't need. Now this would have eventually come up when I deploy the app, but I tend to do things if I remember them now. And you could have a blueprint for all this and or a template and sort of generate the application that way, but I think it's helpful to go through the details here. So I'm going to get rid of all of those, an application JS and then an application CSS. I'm going to keep that for now. I think that there's something I want to change when I push the application out, but yeah, we'll figure it out when we get there. Okay, so now I'm going to commit this as sort of my base. Oh, you know what I'll do is first, before I do that, is configure my database and then switch to Rails helper instead of spec helper, so that we've got that bit done that we sort of punted on before. And then at that point, I'll commit that into my sort of Rails new commit, and then we'll get into actually building a new feature. Okay, so let's switch back to my text editor. Let's check out database YAML. So this is the default, and we're going to change this. So we'll get rid of this. Now I'm going to, in the background here, refer to another project that I use to make sure I can just keep this going, relatively quickly, and I don't forget anything to change in here. Now let me see if you can see what I switched to. You cannot. Okay, good. So let me just take a quick look at that. And okay. So on the default, I'm going to switch to this. I changed the pool to 20. I think that's, I'll keep this lower for now. We can change that later. So the default is 5. I'm going to keep it as that. On the database, I'm going to change here the name to, no, I like this. So charity auction server development. So I want to keep that. I'm going to add a host, which is localhost on this, because it's going to play nicely with the Postgres app. Okay, and then we'll get rid of these. I don't need a password because of the way that I've got Postgres configured. And again, I'm using Postgres app. You can see the little, well, you can't see it, but I've got my little Postgres elephant running in the corner here. Test will, have that same config. And then on the production side, now I'm going to use this config because we're going to be using Heroku later. And this is what we're going to want for that. Okay. So that should be fine. Now let's run. So I'm going to have, this is my basic config. And then I will go back and let's go to my terminal. And we'll just create that database and then run the tests and see how that's all working. Okay, so bin let's see, rake db create, right? Okay, so I think that should be fine. Now, if I change my RSpec.RSpec file, then we will be able to hold on. I change my .RSpec file to require Rails helper, then it should boot with that every time, and now that the database is there, we should be fine. Okay. Switch to that. .RSpec. Switch this to Rails helper. Now, again, that's going to require this file every time. Some people don't like that for the sort of obvious reason that it creates the overhead of running Rails. But given that I'm running Spring, it's not a huge deal, and I think it's worth the convenience for me now. Not a big deal to change if we need to. Okay, so now if I run the test suite, still has an issue. So it says that the test database does not exist. Now, I'm not positive why I didn't create it when I just ran db create. Seems like it should have. I wonder if I should have run bin setup. Well, let's find out. And I think that's half the point of this, is to hit these issues when we do, and then no big deal, we'll fix them. So if I do setup, reset, then what? All right. So I've got to run this in my test environment, and I don't really remember why, and whatever, I feel like in Rails 4 now, this should have been something where it copied it over in the first place, but maybe with the create, you have to do it in a test environment. So it's fine. All right. All right, so now that ran, and now if I run it again, it's a bit faster. So now we're good. So I'm going to commit this, and we'll then push it up to GitHub, and I'll finish with this video, and then we'll move on to implementing a couple of models, getting the basics of our model layer worked out. Now, in general, I actually do most of my sort of Git commands through my text editor. Since I'm here, I'll just do it here for now. But oh, that's right. I don't even have this initiated yet. So I'm gonna init. I'll add everything. Just take a look to see if what was added feels right, or if there's anything I want to exclude. I think that's fine for now. And then I always do Rails new and customizations. There we go. So that's my initial commit. Now I'm going to push this up to GitHub. So let me go grab what the name of that is, or what the remote is. Okay, so I added my remote. I'll push this, and let's go and take a look at GitHub, make sure it's looking right, and then we'll be good. All right, so I just pushed it out. If I refresh this, I should see my Rails new and customization commit from a minute ago. I've got my issues that we're going to run through next all created, so that's good. And my application was sort of run through what the gems are. We've taken out some things. We've got our basic testing sort of rig set up. Again, if I wasn't talking and going through this, would have taken 5 minutes, but hopefully going through the details could be helpful if any of this is new to you or you just want a tour of how I see some things. So that's it for this session. And then next, which I think I'll do right now because I have till 9 o'clock to work on this stuff. Let's build a couple of models.